Hi, I'm Dr. Benjamin, and I want to start with something most eye doctors never explain clearly. Your retina has a built-in pair of sunglasses. It's real, it's made of pigment, and most people over the age of 40 are running low on it without knowing. Today I'm going to walk you through the actual published research on how two specific nutrients protect your eyesight as you age, what the real science says about food versus supplements, and a story from my own patient files that changed how I counsel people about this. No fear tactics, no invented biology, just what we actually know. Let's start with the part of your eye we're talking about, the macula. It's a small area at the center of your retina about the size of a grain of rice, and it's responsible for your sharp central vision, reading, recognizing faces, driving. Inside that macula sits something called macular pigment, made almost entirely from two plant compounds, lutein and zeaxanthin. Here's the part that surprises people. Your body cannot make either of these on its own. They come exclusively from what you eat. If your diet doesn't supply them, your macula simply runs with less protection. Full stop. No amount of sleep, timing, or willpower changes that basic fact. It's a supply problem, not a scheduling problem. The major research on this comes from the National Eye Institute, part of the National Institutes of Health, through a long-running project called the Age-Related Eye Disease Study and its follow-up, AREDS2. This was one of the largest, most rigorously controlled nutrition trials ever run on eye disease, following thousands of participants over years at multiple research centers across the country. The original AREDS formula used beta-carotene alongside vitamin C, vitamin E, and zinc. The follow-up study, AREDS2, tested replacing beta-carotene with lutein and zeaxanthin instead, partly because beta-carotene had been linked to increased lung cancer risk in smokers and former smokers in earlier unrelated trials. The results were meaningful. For people who already had intermediate age-related macular degeneration in at least one eye, the AREDS2 formula with lutein and zeaxanthin reduced the risk of progression to advanced disease, and it did so without the lung cancer risk tied to beta-carotene. That's not a marginal finding. It's why lutein and zeaxanthin show up in nearly every eye-specific supplement on the market today, and why organizations like the American Academy of Ophthalmology reference this research when counseling patients on nutrition and eye health. Now here's the revelation that changes how most people think about this. Supplements were never meant to replace food, and the people studied already had diagnosed disease. For everyone else, meaning most of us at any age with healthy eyes today, the research on prevention points back to ordinary diet, not pills. And that's a very different, much less dramatic conversation than what most videos on this topic tell you. It doesn't sell as well, it just happens to be true. There's a second piece of research worth knowing about, separate from AREDS2. Population studies, the kind that track large groups of people over many years and compare their diets to their eye health outcomes, have repeatedly found that people with higher dietary intake of lutein and zeaxanthin tend to have higher measured macular pigment density and lower rates of advanced macular degeneration later in life. This kind of study can't prove cause and effect the way a controlled trial can, but combined with the AREDS2 results, it paints a fairly consistent picture. These two nutrients matter, and food is the primary way most people get them. It's also worth being honest about what the research does not show. It does not show that any single vegetable eaten at any single hour reverses existing vision loss. It does not show a strict biological deadline each night. And it does not show that fermenting, chilling, or juicing a vegetable multiplies its nutrient content by some dramatic factor overnight. Real nutrition science tends to be slower and less cinematic than that, which is exactly why it gets left out of a lot of viral health content. So which foods actually contain meaningful amounts of lutein and zeaxanthin? The research consistently points to a short list, and it's less exotic than you'd expect. Dark leafy greens are the biggest source by far. Kale, spinach, and collard greens contain far more lutein per serving than almost anything else studied. Cooking them lightly, steaming rather than boiling, appears to preserve more of the carotenoid content since these compounds can leach into cooking water. Egg yolks are a smaller but interestingly efficient source. Studies looking at bioavailability, meaning how much of a nutrient your body actually absorbs and uses, found that lutein from egg yolks is absorbed more efficiently than lutein from some leafy greens. That's because lutein is fat-soluble, and egg yolks already contain the fat needed to help transport it. No extra oil required. Corn, orange peppers, and pistachios also contain zeaxanthin specifically, which is the sister compound that concentrates most heavily in the very center of the macula, while lutein spreads across a wider surrounding ring. This fat solubility point matters more than people realize. If you eat a big plate of spinach with no fat at all, you absorb only a fraction of the lutein sitting right there on your plate. Pairing leafy greens with olive oil, avocado, or eggs measurably improves absorption. This has been shown in controlled feeding studies comparing carotenoid blood levels with and without added fat. It's a simple, practical detail, and it's one of the few hacks in this whole topic that's actually backed by real data rather than folklore. What about timing, morning versus evening? Here's where I want to be direct with you. There isn't strong, replicated clinical evidence that eating these foods at a specific hour changes how much reaches your retina. Your body processes and stores carotenoids over days and weeks, not within a single overnight window. If someone tells you there's a precise 3-hour clock your eyes are racing against every night, that's not something the research supports. What the research does support is consistency, regular, ongoing intake over months, because macular pigment builds up gradually and also fades gradually if you stop consuming these foods. Think of it less like a nightly emergency and more like a slow-growing savings account. Beyond diet, a few other factors show up repeatedly in the research. Not smoking, since smoking is one of the strongest known risk factors for macular degeneration. Wearing sunglasses that block ultraviolet light, especially if you spend a lot of time outdoors. And managing blood pressure and blood sugar, since conditions like diabetes directly damage the small blood vessels feeding the retina. That's the mechanism behind diabetic retinopathy, a separate but related concern that has its own body of research and its own treatment pathways. I also want to address something people ask me constantly. What about blueberries, bilberries, and other dark-colored eye superfoods you see marketed heavily online? These foods do contain antioxidant compounds called anthocyanins, and antioxidants in general play a supporting role in reducing oxidative stress throughout the body, including in the eye. But the evidence specifically tying anthocyanins to measurable eye disease prevention in humans is far thinner and far less consistent than the Lutein and Zeaxanthin research. That doesn't mean don't eat blueberries. They're a healthy food with real nutritional value. It just means I won't tell you they're a proven eye treatment, because the data doesn't support that claim the way it supports the AREDS2 findings. Another common question, does drinking a vegetable as a juice work better than eating it whole? For fat-soluble nutrients like lutein and zeaxanthin, juicing without any fat added doesn't inherently help absorption, and juicing also removes the fiber that helps regulate how nutrients are released into your bloodstream over time. Whole food with a source of fat alongside it remains the best supported approach based on what these feeding studies actually measured. One more thing worth clearing up, because I get asked this in every comment section. Does eye strain from screens cause permanent damage the way macular degeneration does? Based on the current research, no. Screen use and blue light from phones and computers are linked to digital eye strain, meaning dryness, fatigue, and temporary blurred vision, but they are not currently shown to cause the kind of structural retinal damage seen in age-related macular degeneration. Those are two different problems with two different causes, and it's worth not conflating them, even though a lot of content online blends them together for effect. If you want a simple, evidence-grounded routine, here's what I actually recommend to patients. Aim for a serving of dark leafy greens most days of the week. A cup of cooked kale or spinach is a reasonable target. Add a source of fat when you eat them, a drizzle of olive oil, some avocado, or a handful of nuts. Include eggs a few times a week if that fits your diet, since the yolk's lutein is well absorbed. If you already have diagnosed macular degeneration, talk to your ophthalmologist about whether an AREDS2 formula supplement makes sense for you specifically. That's the population the research actually studied, and supplementation decisions should be made with your own doctor based on your own eye exam findings, not a generic recommendation. And get regular dilated eye exams, especially past the age of 50, since early-stage macular degeneration often has no noticeable symptoms until damage has already progressed. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Margaret, in her late 60s, who came to me a few years back. She noticed straight lines on her kitchen tile looking slightly wavy, which is actually a classic early sign of macular changes, something called metamorphopsia. It's subtle, easy to dismiss as tired eyes or bad lighting, but it's often one of the first things people notice before any formal diagnosis. Her eye exam showed early intermediate macular degeneration, and understandably, she was frightened. Her own mother had lost significant vision late in life, and Margaret had spent years quietly worried the same thing was coming for her. We talked through her diet, and it turned out she rarely ate leafy greens and had cut eggs out years earlier over cholesterol concerns that, frankly, didn't apply well to her overall health picture. We made two changes. She started having spinach or kale most days with a bit of olive oil, and she added eggs back in a few times a week. Her ophthalmologist also started her on an AREDS2 supplement given her diagnosis, which is exactly the population that formula was studied on. We also talked about sunglasses, since she gardened for hours most afternoons without any UV protection, and about getting her blood pressure better controlled, which her primary doctor helped her with. At her follow-up exams over the next couple of years, her macular degeneration remained stable rather than progressing to the advanced stage, which, for a condition like this, is genuinely a good outcome and one that matches what the research would predict for someone who made these changes and stuck with them. I can't tell you which single change mattered most, and neither can she. That's the honest answer, and I'd rather give you an honest answer than a satisfying one. But she still tells me the wavy tile lines never came back, that gardening in a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses became second nature, and that she no longer lies awake worrying about losing her sight the way her mother did. That's the kind of quietly good result this research is actually about. Not an overnight miracle, but steady, unglamorous consistency that adds up over years. That's the real science behind lutein, zeaxanthin, and your eyes. Not a countdown clock, not a secret window closing while you sleep, just steady, well-supported nutrition backed by one of the largest eye studies ever conducted and confirmed by years of population data since. It's less dramatic than a lot of what you'll find online, but it's the version that's actually held up under scrutiny, and honestly, that's worth more than any viral claim. If this helped you understand your own eye health a little better, subscribe, and I'll keep bringing you research you can actually trust. I'm Dr. Benjamin. Take care of your eyes, and I'll see you in the next one.